"Step out of the car. South Side trash." The words left Officer Patrick Donnelly's mouth with the dry certainty of a man who believed no one would ever hold him accountable. In that single breath, the fate of his badge, his pension, and every shield he had ever depended on began to collapse. He did not know it yet, but this moment on Sheridan Road would end his career, shatter his reputation, and expose the quiet machinery of discrimination his department had perfected for years. His hand clamped down on Aisha Washington's wrist, twisting it sharply as he pulled her from the driver's seat. The metal cuffs bit so deep into her skin that a thin line of blood rose instantly. Pain shot up her arm, and her balance faltered as he shoved her against the trunk with unnecessary force, her chest tightening as humiliation settled over her like a weight she refused to show. Before going deeper into this story, tell me where you are watching from. And if you want more stories about truth, justice, and the moments that change everything, make sure you subscribe to the channel and give me a like. It helps more than you know. Sheridan Road carried its usual evening chill, but Aisha Washington barely felt it. She kept her breathing steady. She kept her voice calm. She kept her eyes on Donnelly, who appeared restless, irritated, and convinced he had caught someone from Englewood trying to slip into a wealthy suburb. Her Honda Accord was old by design, registered to an Englewood address by design, and showed no hint of the authority she carried behind the uniform she was not wearing tonight. Her hair sat neatly pulled back, her clothes simple and unremarkable. The goal was not appearance, the goal was exposure. She had volunteered for this mission, knowing she was walking into a system built to humiliate people who looked like her, lived like her family, or dared to drive through neighborhoods designed to keep them out. She handed Officer Miguel Torres her documents without hesitation. His voice had been polite, his eyes uneasy. He had said her right taillight looked dim. She had known that was false. She also knew he was not the true danger. Donnelly was... Torres stepped back with a nervous glance as Donnelly approached. The captain scanned her license. His eyes lingered on the Englewood address, and something sharpened in his expression. He tapped the roof of her car twice with his flashlight. "We're going to take a look in your trunk," he said. His tone carried the same finality as a verdict. Aisha did not raise her voice. She simply answered, not without probable cause. Donnelly's eyebrow lifted as though she had personally offended him. "You think you know the law?" She did not answer. She did not need to. The silence irritated him more than any words could. He motioned Torres forward, and the younger officer hesitated. That hesitation sealed Torres's role in everything that would follow. That brief flicker of conscience would later become the key that opened every hidden file, every email, every shameless quota system buried inside Evanston Police Department. But tonight, Torres only stood there, conflicted, watching the situation tip into something he feared but had never had the courage to name. Donnelly tugged open the driver's door again. "Step out," he repeated. He had already decided what she was. He had already decided what he was going to do. He had already decided she had no power. Aisha stepped out slowly and kept her hands visible. She knew the next few minutes needed precision. This was the moment she had trained for, prepared for, and accepted with full awareness of the danger. She kept her body still. She kept her mind focused. She kept her voice controlled. "Captain," she said quietly, "you are exceeding your..." Donnelly did not let her finish. His hand grabbed her wrist. His force was intentional. The cuffs snapped too tight. Pain radiated immediately. She did not cry out, but she felt it, and she let him believe she was powerless. He pushed her toward the patrol car, muttering something about people from the South Side acting tough. Her shoulder hit the metal door frame. She inhaled sharply, not from fear, but from the awful familiarity of the moment. Her brother had once faced the same cruelty. 12 years earlier, a routine stop, a pretext, a shot fired by another officer who had sworn he feared for his life. Her brother had been unarmed. He had been a resident physician on his way home. He had been her closest friend, and he had died on a sidewalk under the same type of gaze Donnelly was giving her now. The memory never faded. It had shaped her decision to climb higher, fight harder, and command the Army's Civil Rights Directorate with absolute conviction. And now it had brought her to this exact moment. Torres shifted uncomfortably behind them. He looked at the cuffs. He looked at Donnelly. He looked at Aisha, who remained calm despite the pain burning through her wrists. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but lost the courage. Aisha watched him briefly. She saw the conflict. She saw the potential. She saw the future whistleblower who did not yet know he would be the reason an entire operation collapsed. Donnelly shoved her into the back seat, the impact jarring her spine. She braced herself and said nothing. Donnelly leaned in, grabbed her smart watch, and scoffed. Cute toy. Then he tossed it onto the front seat without realizing the truth. Aisha had already pressed the hidden button. The signal had moved quickly, through a satellite relay, through an encrypted Pentagon channel, through the desk of Colonel Marcus Hale. The message had been simple. Operation compromised, asset detained, immediate response required. Aisha exhaled slowly as the door slammed shut. She knew the countdown had begun. She knew the next hours would determine the fate of the Evanston checkpoint scheme, the political ambitions behind it, and the quiet suffering of hundreds of Englewood residents whose lives had been disrupted, searched, fined, or threatened under the guise of public safety. Donnelly walked to his cruiser with a swagger he had cultivated for years. He believed he had won. He believed he had subdued another nameless black driver who dared to say no. He believed this arrest would never be questioned. But his certainty was built on sand. And tonight, the tide had already started to rise. Aisha sat in silence. Her wrists burned, her jaw tightened, but her resolve remained steady. She had done what she came to do, and she knew exactly what was coming next. The door to the Evanston Police Department closed behind her with a hard metallic echo, and that sound alone told Aisha Washington the rest of this night would be measured not by fairness, but by the small cruelties of men who believed they were untouchable. Captain Patrick Donnelly kept his hand tight around her upper arm as he walked her through the booking area. "Move," he said under his breath, as though the simple act of breathing the same air offended him. He did not know that every second of his behavior, every word, every gesture, was another brick stacked onto the wall that would soon collapse over his entire career. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, sharp and cold. Aisha stood still as an officer snapped her photograph, then rolled each of her fingers in black ink with careless pressure that made the raw skin around her wrists throb. Donnelly tossed her military ID onto the metal table with a dismissive flick. "Fake," he muttered. Pretty convincing, though she did not answer. Silence was her shield. Silence was her calculation. Silence was the rope he kept tightening around his own neck without realizing it. The booking sergeant typed lazily at a computer. Torres stood off to the side, posture stiff, eyes uneasy. He avoided looking at Aisha too long. She could see the tremor in his fingertips. His conscience was working hard against fear, duty, and the culture that had shaped him since his first day on the force. But the change would come. Not tonight, but soon. Aisha waited as Donnelly shoved a clipboard in front of her, demanding a signature confirming her personal belongings. She signed without comment. She sat when ordered. She rose when ordered. She stayed calm as Donnelly spoke loudly enough for the room to hear, saying things meant to diminish her, meant to reinforce the idea that an Englewood license plate equaled guilt, disrespect, and suspicion. His voice carried a familiar rhythm, the kind used by people who believed they were the final authority on who deserved dignity and who did not. He was wrong, and he was running out of time. The smell of burnt coffee and industrial disinfectant filled the hallway as they walked her toward the processing room. In that narrow space, she heard Donnelly laugh with two officers behind her. "South Side folks think they're special now," he joked, especially the ones with fancy stories about military rank. Their chuckles hit her like small blows, not because they surprised her, but because they reminded her exactly why she had agreed to enter this trap. She was here for the people who never had the power to fight back. She was here for the ones who spent nights in holding cells because they were too tired, too scared, or too poor to challenge a false charge. She was here because her brother never got the chance to call for help, and she was here because the system that killed him had never stopped harming others. The processing room was small, a metal bench, a worn camera, a fingerprint scanner that beeped with each roll of her fingers. Aisha looked at none of it, her eyes focused ahead. Donnelly hovered behind her, arms crossed, chest puffed. He enjoyed this part, the part where a person lost control, where humiliation seeped in, where the world felt small and claustrophobic. But he could not read her hesitation for fear. He could not see the quiet storm gathering beyond the walls. He could not sense the countdown ticking inside a Pentagon control room, where Colonel Marcus Hale now studied her encrypted location, already coordinating an approach that would arrive with surgical speed. The protocol was clear. One call, one signal, one confirmation. After that, the military took over. Donnelly believed he had arrested a nobody. In truth, he had just placed handcuffs on a 4-star general operating under federal authority. Aisha sat alone on the metal bench as Donnelly stepped outside to speak with two detectives. His voice rose and fell in mocking tones she did not need to decipher. She closed her eyes for a moment and let her breathing settle. She replayed the exact moment she pressed the hidden button. She pictured Hale's face when he saw her identifier flash red, signaling distress. She thought of her brother's smile, her mother's prayers, and the oath she had sworn when she took command of the Civil Rights Directorate. When she opened her eyes again, she felt no fear, only clarity. Detective Elena Vargas appeared at the doorway, arms folded, eyes narrowed. She was quiet, observant. Something in her gaze told Aisha she had already begun piecing things together. Vargas had served in the Marines. She recognized the military ID on the table. She recognized the bearing, the posture, the calm control Aisha displayed, and she recognized the danger of letting Donnelly continue unchecked. But Vargas, too, was bound by rank, by politics, by the thin line between survival and integrity. She spoke softly, just loud enough for Aisha to hear. "You get your phone call in a moment," she said. "Use it wisely." Her tone carried no sarcasm, only warning, only respect. When the officer opened the door to the phone room, Aisha walked with measured steps. The handset was old, the cord twisted, the metal stool cold beneath her. She picked up the receiver and dialed a number she had memorized years ago. Each digit carried weight, each ring carried purpose. When the other end picked up, no names were exchanged, no explanations, only a single phrase spoken in a firm, steady voice. "Delta Oversight confirms. Team will be on site in 68 minutes. The line disconnected. The mission shifted. The storm began." Donnelly was waiting when she stepped out. "Hope you enjoyed your call," he said with a smirk. She looked at him with quiet restraint. His smirk deepened, misreading her silence as defeat. "You're not going anywhere tonight," he added. "Not until we're done." She did not respond. She did not need to. The answer was already racing toward them in 3 unmarked SUVs, cutting through Chicago's night with silent urgency. Back in the holding area, She listened as Donnelly bragged to his supervisors, painting her as uncooperative, arrogant, and suspicious. He played his role with ease, oblivious to the fact that his words were being recorded, that every insult would become evidence, and that the career he clung to would soon unravel piece by piece. Torres stood nearby, shifting his weight, glancing at Aisha, then looking away quickly. He was wrestling with the truth. He was wrestling with guilt, and soon. He would make a choice that would change the trajectory of the entire investigation. Aisha watched the clock on the wall. She counted each passing minute. 68 minutes. It was not a prediction. It was a promise. And as the second hand continued its slow rotation, she knew Donnelly's world was already collapsing, even as he strutted through the station unaware of the reckoning approaching his door. The interrogation room was small enough for every breath to feel recorded, every movement to echo a little longer than it should, and every lie to hang in the air until someone brave enough pulled it down. Aisha Washington sat in the metal chair with her wrists still marked from the cuffs, her posture steady, her expression calm, and her mind sharper than the two men who walked in pretending they controlled the night. Captain Patrick Donnelly entered first, carrying the arrogance of someone who had abused authority for years without consequence. Councilman Robert Kensington stepped in behind him with the quiet confidence of a man who had helped design the very system that trapped her. His suit was immaculate, his smile thin, his eyes calculating. He looked at her like a businessman assessing property he intended to acquire. Donnelly shut the door, dropped a file on the table, and spoke with the tone of a man who believed he was delivering an ultimatum. "Here's how this goes," he said. "You sign the obstruction form, admit you resisted, and we downgrade this to a citation." Kensington folded his hands neatly, as if rehearsing a performance meant for a courtroom or a campaign ad. "It is in your best interest," he added, with a polite cruelty that only years of political insulation could sharpen. Neither man understood they were sealing their own fate. Stroke by stroke, word by word. Aisha looked at the document. 1 page, 2 checkboxes, a signature line waiting to confirm a lie. She did not touch it. She did not lean forward. She let the silence do the work. Kensington spoke again, his voice low and patient. The way someone speaks to a child who has not yet learned the rules of a household. "People from Inglewood often misunderstand how things function here," he said. "Evanston is orderly, predictable. We keep it that way for a reason." Donnelly gave a small smirk, as if he had been waiting for the cue. "You think you know your rights?" he asked. "You don't know how this place works." He tapped the table. He tapped it again. His irritation grew with every second she refused to fear him, and it was that frustration, more than any policy, more than any directive, that began to crack the mask he wore for the public, outside the room. Detective Elena Vargas stood at the doorway pretending to review paperwork, though in truth she was studying the dynamic inside. Her jaw tightened. She had seen power abused before, but tonight carried a weight she could not shake. She watched Donnelly's posture, Kensington's condescending tilt of the head, the deliberate pressure, the fake professionalism masking coercion. And then she looked at Aisha, whose calm presence unsettled her more than anything else. It was the kind of calm a trained soldier held, the kind that came from authority, the kind that could not be counterfeited. And Vargas saw something Donnelly had missed. The insignia on the confiscated ID card was not fake. It was exact. It was precise. It was something no amateur could replicate, inside the room. Kensington slid the paper closer. "This is a simple misunderstanding," he said smoothly. "A small admission avoids a much larger issue." He wanted her signature not for justice, but for metrics, for quota, for the appearance of control, for the engine of statistics that justified the existence of the checkpoint program. The program he had quietly nurtured for years under the name of public safety, even while it served a darker purpose, reducing property values in Englewood, clearing land for developers connected to his family, and keeping minority drivers out of wealthy neighborhoods without ever saying those words out loud. Aisha knew every detail. She had studied the operation for months. She had memorized the maps, the stops, the patterns, and she had come here tonight to reveal the truth by letting the system expose itself. She finally lifted her eyes to meet his. "No," she said. One word. Firm. Controlled. Final. Donnelly's temper snapped. He slammed his palm onto the table. Hard enough for the metal to ring. Kensington did not flinch. He only smiled. The way a man smiles when he believes he has already won. "You are making a mistake," he said. Aisha held his gaze. "So are you." The room went still. Donnelly looked between them, confused by the shift in tone he could not decipher. Kensington leaned in, lowering his voice. "You do not understand how far this reaches," he whispered, "or who protects it." She did not blink. "I understand exactly who protects it," she said. "And they are on their way. For the first time." A hint of uncertainty crossed Donnelly's face. "What does that mean?" he asked. Kensington did not give him the chance to follow the thought. "She is bluffing," he said coldly. "People like her always bluff when cornered. Hold her until she agrees." Donnelly straightened, reassured. "She'll break," he said, as though speaking about an object, not a human being. He walked to the door, ready to call for additional officers, but before he reached it, Vargas stepped inside. Her voice was steady, but her eyes carried a warning. "Captain," she said, "I need you outside." Donnelly frowned. "Not now," Vargas repeated. "Now." Something in her tone halted him. He stepped into the hall with Kensington. The door shut behind them. Vargas turned toward Aisha. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Vargas exhaled quietly. "That ID," she said. "It's real." Aisha did not confirm. She did not deny. But her silence held the truth. Vargas opened her hand, revealing a small USB drive she had spent 18 months filling with internal emails, manipulated reports, quota communications, and hidden directives. "I think you will need this soon," she said. Her voice carried a mixture of fear and resolve. "I have a son. He was stopped at one of the checkpoints last year. They searched him. They humiliated him. He is 12. A flicker of pain crossed her face. "I became a police officer to protect people like him. And now I am helping destroy the system that hurt him." She placed the USB on the table. "I hope you do what I cannot." Footsteps approached in the hallway. Vargas stepped back. The door opened. Donnelly entered again, irritation dripping from every gesture. "Enough," he snapped. "You're signing the form." Kensington followed with a polished smile that almost concealed the tremor beginning in his jaw. "We do not want this to escalate," he said. "But it will." Aisha watched them both. She saw the fear they did not understand yet. She saw the consequences they could not imagine yet. She saw the end of their careers forming like a shadow behind them. And then she spoke with the full weight of her rank, though neither man recognized the authority rising in her voice. "This is already bigger than either of you," she said, "and you are running out of time." Donnelly scoffed. Kensington rolled his eyes. Neither noticed the faint vibration in the walls as a convoy of black SUVs approached the station. Neither heard the quiet buzz of encrypted radios coming online. Neither man sensed how close they stood to the edge of collapse. But Aisha felt it, and she knew the mask the city had worn for years was about to fall. 68 minutes after Aisha pressed the hidden signal, the night outside Evanston Police Department changed without warning. 3 unmarked black SUVs rolled to the curb with quiet authority, their engines low, their movements precise, their windows dark enough to reflect the blue-white glow of the station lights, inside the interrogation room. Donnelly was still pacing, still convinced he held control, still oblivious to the reckoning already unfolding just beyond the glass. Councilman Robert Kensington adjusted his tie, rehearsing the same patronizing lines he planned to use on Aisha again, certain she would eventually bow to pressure. Neither man noticed the shift in the hallway, the sudden stillness, the way officers' conversations halted mid-sentence, the soft thud of boots moving as one. The Pentagon team entered the station with firm steps and quiet discipline. Colonel Marcus Hale walked at the front, face set with the calm certainty of a man who understood both urgency and consequence. His presence alone changed the air. Officers stepped back instinctively. Even those who did not know his name recognized the authority in his stride. Hale did not ask permission. He held up a single folder marked with the seal of the Department of Defense. "We are assuming jurisdiction," he said to the watch commander. His voice carried no hostility, only the unmistakable weight of federal authority. The commander stuttered, confused, unprepared. Hale repeated, "Effective immediately." The room fell silent. No one argued. No one dared. The station had become a federal crime scene. Donnelly's authority evaporated in an instant, though he did not yet understand the magnitude of the shift. Outside, a crowd had begun to form. The video of Aisha's arrest, recorded by a resident from Englewood who recognized her face only after she was forced into the cruiser, had already reached 2 million views. People were gathering under the cold Chicago night, holding phones, murmuring in disbelief, anger rising like steam from the pavement. Community leaders had arrived, local journalists had arrived, even students from Northwestern filtered in, confused and troubled. The station's brick facade stood rigid, but the air around it crackled with the electricity of a brewing storm. Inside, Hale walked past desks, past confused officers, past the processing room where Aisha had been held. He did not slow down. He entered the hallway outside the interrogation room. Torres, who had been trying to steady himself through the chaos, froze when he saw Hale. Something inside him shifted. This was the moment he had feared, and the moment he had prayed for. Something in his face cracked, a mixture of guilt, relief, and dread. Hale looked at him briefly. Torres lowered his eyes. That simple exchange told Hale everything he needed to know. Someone inside was breaking. Someone inside had seen too much. Someone inside could still choose truth. In the interrogation room, Kensington was mid-sentence when the door opened. He turned with irritation ready in his throat, but the words died when he saw Hale. Donnelly frowned in confusion, then frustration, then disbelief. "Who are you?" he demanded. Hale did not answer him. Instead, he looked directly at Aisha. "General Washington," he said. "We're here." Donnelly blinked, unsure what he had heard. Kensington's face paled. Aisha rose slowly, controlled, dignified. She nodded once. Hale stepped aside for her to exit. Donnelly's voice cracked. "General what?" Kensington stumbled back a step, the polished veneer of his confidence shattering at the edges. Aisha walked past them both, her posture steady, her silence cutting deeper than any accusation. The fallout began immediately. Hale turned toward Donnelly. "Your officers are relieved of duty," he said. "All of them." Donnelly tried to speak, but no sound emerged. His career was ending in real time, and he was helpless to stop the unraveling. Kensington tried to recover, raising his voice. "This is a city matter," he protested. Hale's expression did not change. Not anymore. He replied, "You are implicated in a federal civil rights investigation." Kensington's mouth opened, but no argument came. He was surrounded, cornered not by force, but by the truth he had long believed he could control. As Hale escorted Aisha down the hallway, Torres found himself unable to stay silent any longer. His chest tightened with an urgency he had never felt. He hurried after them. "Ma'am," he said, voice trembling. "There's something you need to see." Hale turned sharply, prepared to block him, but Aisha lifted a hand. Let him speak. Torres took a breath that seemed to draw every ounce of courage he had in reserve. "Captain Donnelly has been ordering us to increase stops on Englewood plates," he said. "We were told to make numbers. We were told people from the south side don't fight tickets." His voice broke. We targeted them on purpose." The confession hit the hallway like a dropped weight. Officers nearby froze. Hale did not move. Aisha met Torres's eyes. "Do you have proof?" she asked. Torres nodded slowly, then reached under his vest and pulled out a small zip drive. 18 months of emails, quotas, maps, everything. His hands shook as he placed it in hers. "I couldn't keep carrying it," he whispered. "Not after tonight." Vargas appeared at the end of the hall, watching the exchange, pride and sorrow mixing in her expression. She knew the courage it took. She also knew what it would cost Torres, but truth always had a cost. And tonight, he chose to pay it. Hale inspected the drive, then nodded. "We'll secure it." He turned to Aisha. "Your mission is complete." But she shook her head. "No," she said quietly. "The mission is just beginning." Hale understood. The drive would crack the case open. The video outside would ignite the public. The Pentagon team would dismantle the lie from the inside. But Aisha Washington, the woman who had once buried her brother after a pretextual stop, would be the force that pushed the truth into daylight, outside the station. The crowd grew larger, voices rising in a mix of anger and hope. The world was already shifting. News vans began to line the street. The mayor's office started making frantic phone calls. Kensington's staff tried to craft statements. Donnelly sat in a chair with his head in his hands, the weight of his choices crashing down. As Aisha stepped out of the station surrounded by the Pentagon team, the cold wind brushed her face. The crowd fell silent as they recognized her. Some whispered, some lifted their phones, some simply stared, stunned by the revelation that the woman arrested at a checkpoint was not just innocent. She was a 4-star Army general, and the system that had profiled her had no idea who they had put in handcuffs. Aisha paused at the top of the steps. She looked at the faces pressed behind the yellow tape. She looked at the station behind her, now in federal hands. She looked at the night that had begun with humiliation and now carried the weight of revolution. The storm had arrived, and it had only just begun. The investigation that followed did not move with the speed of shock or anger. It moved with the heavy, deliberate weight of truth pressing its way through layers of denial, paperwork, politics, and corrupted loyalties. For 3 long months, federal agents, Pentagon analysts, and Department of Justice civil rights prosecutors sifted through every stop, every email, every manipulated report tied to the Evanston checkpoint program. The USB drive from Miguel Torres became the spine of the entire case. It revealed quota orders disguised as visibility metrics, maps with circles drawn around Englewood license clusters, and internal jokes about keeping Southside cars out of the clean neighborhoods. It exposed the deliberate strategy behind every arrest, every search, every humiliation inflicted on black drivers who had simply crossed into a zip code where the city never intended them to belong. And behind that strategy sat 2 names that appeared on nearly every directive: Captain Patrick Donnelly and Councilman Robert Kensington. Their fingerprints were everywhere. Woven into a pattern so blatant, the investigators stopped calling it bias and started calling it orchestration. The day the FBI arrived at Kensington's home, the entire block watched in stunned silence. His house, immaculate lawn, polished stone driveway, 2 luxury cars parked symmetrically, became the backdrop of a search warrant signed by a federal judge. Agents moved through his study, his safe, his office files. They found what Aisha already suspected: Property acquisition contracts drafted months before Englewood home values started to dip, emails guaranteeing developers access to undervalued markets, and private memos outlining how increased traffic stops in surrounding areas would accelerate relocation. It was a scheme that had been hiding in plain sight, dressed in the language of public safety, wrapped in respectability politics, and powered by a city that trusted Kensington more than it ever trusted the people he targeted. He was taken to the federal building without the polished smile he once wore like armor. For the first time in years, he had no script to rely on at the police department. Donnelly's fall unraveled with the cruelty of poetic justice. He was suspended without pay as the investigation deepened. His badge was locked away, his access revoked. The officers who once laughed at his jokes avoided his eyes. And at home, his world collapsed even faster. The day after his suspension, his wife filed for divorce, citing years of neglect, emotional abuse, and fear that his career would one day ruin their children's lives. His oldest son stopped speaking to him after watching the video of Aisha's arrest. His daughter asked why people online were calling her father a racist. Donnelly had no answer. He had spent years believing the system would always protect men like him. Now, he learned what every targeted driver had known for decades. When the truth arrives, there is no shield strong enough to stop it. Meanwhile, Torres walked into each interview room with the weight of the department on his shoulders. His hands trembled every time he handed investigators another folder, another email chain, another piece of evidence showing how deep the deception ran. But he kept going. He kept speaking. He kept telling the truth, even when guilt clawed at him. Even when he wondered whether redemption was possible for someone who had participated. Even reluctantly. In the machinery he now helped dismantle, his name would later be printed in dozens of articles as the whistleblower who exposed a civil rights violation on a scale the city had never acknowledged. But in these early weeks, he was simply a young officer trying to make peace with the difference between fear and courage. Detective Elena Vargas watched the fallout with a calm that came from hard-earned clarity. She gave her full statement, handed over her 18 months of secret data collection, and testified to every conversation she heard between Donnelly and Kensington. She spoke of her son being stopped and searched without cause. She spoke of the shame she carried as an officer, and when she walked out of the federal building after her final interview, she felt something she had not felt in years, relief that the truth was finally strong enough to stand on its own. And then came the moment Aisha had been waiting for, a confrontation not forged in anger, but in the quiet power of accountability. Kensington sat in a federal interview room with his tie loosened, his posture deflated, and his confidence stripped to its bones. When Aisha entered, he looked up with a mixture of surprise and dread. He no longer saw an Englewood driver. He saw what he had overlooked, the rank, the authority, the history she carried. She took her seat across from him, hands clasped, voice steady. 12 years ago, she said, my brother was stopped without cause. He was killed on the sidewalk. No one was held accountable. Kensington swallowed, throat tight. Aisha continued, I made a promise that day. I would expose every system that used fear and discrimination to control people who look like me. Her eyes did not waver. Kensington looked away. His breathing faltered. For the first time, he faced the human cost of the policies he had helped create, and he had no defense. Across the city, thousands of residents from Englewood submitted statements describing years of unjust stops, intimidation, and searches. Stories filled the inboxes of federal investigators, mothers, grandfathers, teenagers, veterans, nurses, each voice a piece of a pattern that the city had dismissed for years. Their testimonies formed the backbone of what would soon become one of the largest civil rights lawsuits in Illinois history. In these months, Aisha remained central to the investigation, not as a victim, but as a witness, a strategist, and the quiet force guiding the transformation that was unfolding. She attended every briefing. She answered every question. She offered insight into patterns of profiling she had studied for years. And though exhaustion pulled at her, she never allowed it to break her resolve. She carried the memory of her brother with her through each step, letting it strengthen her instead of weaken her. By the end of the third month, the Department of Justice announced formal charges. Donnelly would stand trial for violating federal civil rights protections, falsifying reports, and enforcing discriminatory practices. Kensington would face charges for conspiracy, corruption, and orchestrating a scheme to depress property values through targeted policing. The announcement shook Evanston politics to its core. The mayor tried to distance himself. The city council scrambled. Community leaders demanded reform. Reporters camped outside government buildings. And Englewood residents stood on porches and in church halls, holding each other through a mixture of vindication and grief for the years they lost under the weight of suspicion. And through it all, Aisha remained anchored in one quiet truth. The reckoning was here. And it had only become possible because people finally refused to be silent. The federal courthouse at Dirksen opened its doors to a storm of cameras, reporters, and citizens who had waited months to see whether justice would finally pierce the shield that had protected Evanston's policing system for so long. Inside the tall glass entrance, the air was heavy with expectation. Jurors filed in with solemn expressions. Attorneys organized stacks of evidence, each sheet marked by the pain of residents who had been stopped, searched, mocked, or threatened under the guise of public safety. At the center of the storm sat Captain Patrick Donnelly, wearing a suit that failed to hide the exhaustion beneath his eyes. His hands trembled, not enough for the cameras to catch, but enough for anyone near him to notice. He had once marched through the Evanston Police Department believing he could intimidate anyone, bend protocol to his will, and hide behind his badge when questions arose. Now, stripped of uniform and authority, he sat like a man awaiting a verdict he already knew he could not escape. Councilman Robert Kensington sat 2 chairs away, still in a tailored suit, still holding the faint posture of arrogance. Though his eyes betrayed the first signs of collapse, he had believed himself untouchable, shielded by money, connections, and years of political insulation. But federal courtrooms do not bend to charm, and juries do not respond to polished smiles. When the trial began, the first piece of evidence shown to the jury was the video recorded by the Englewood resident the night Aisha was arrested. The room fell silent as the footage illuminated the screen. They saw Donnelly twist Aisha's wrist, shove her against the trunk, and tighten the cuffs until her skin broke. They heard him say words he later denied under oath. They saw her composure, her dignity, her refusal to bow to the cruelty she faced. And they saw the moment officers mocked her, believing no one of consequence would ever hear their laughter. For the jury, it was a window into a truth the city had ignored. For Donnelly, it was the moment he realized nothing he said today could erase the reality captured on that screen. Then came the documents, the emails Torres had provided, the internal memos, the quota sheets written with cold efficiency. Jurors read phrases like Englewood plates, stop priority, South Side crossings need pressure, and hit the numbers before month end. More than one juror shook their head. One woman wiped away tears. The patterns were undeniable, the intent unmistakable, the discrimination deliberate. And the courtroom felt each revelation like another crack, splitting open the old lie that the checkpoints had been about safety. When Torres took the stand, the room breathed differently. He walked slowly, hands clasped, eyes lowered. He sat, swallowed hard, and looked at the jurors with the expression of a man carrying the weight of his own complicity. His voice trembled at first. "I did wrong," he admitted. "I knew the orders were wrong. I followed them anyway. His words were not eloquent. They were raw, they were painful, and they were true. He explained how Donnelly had pushed officers to increase stops, how Kensington had visited the department under the guise of public oversight, how officers were praised for ticketing black drivers and criticized for waving them through. He described nights when he went home sick with guilt. He broke down when he spoke about the night Aisha was arrested. "I should have stopped it," he said through tears. "I should have spoken up sooner. I am sorry." The prosecution treated him with measured compassion. The defense tried to paint him as unstable, but Torres remained steady. His testimony humanized the systemic pressure while condemning the people who designed it. When he stepped off the stand, a quiet respect followed him, even from those who once doubted his courage. Then came Aisha Washington. The courtroom rose when she entered. Though the judge did not command it, she took her seat with calm authority, shoulders straight, eyes clear. She was not there as a victim. She was there as a witness. Her voice carried a weight that silenced everything else. She described the stop, the unreasonable search attempt, the excessive force, and the arrogant certainty with which Donnelly escalated the encounter. She did not embellish. She did not show anger. Her strength was in her restraint. And when she spoke of her brother, the wrongful stop that ended his life 12 years earlier, the entire room felt the depth of a loss that had shaped her purpose. Her pain was quiet, but it was unmistakable. "I came to expose a system," she said, "not just an officer." Kensington avoided her gaze. Donnelly stared at the table. Their attorneys scribbled notes no one would remember. When the prosecution rested, the defense tried to frame the program as a misguided attempt at safety, claiming the quota emails were misinterpreted performance metrics, claiming the stops were randomized. But the evidence was overwhelming. The data told a different story. The victims told a different story. The officers themselves told a different story, and the jury did not look convinced by the explanations offered. After 6 days of testimony, the judge delivered instructions, and the jury deliberated for only 5 hours when they returned. The courtroom held its breath. Donnelly stared straight ahead. Kensington gripped the edge of the table. The foreman stood, unfolding the paper with hands that remained steady despite the tension in the room. He read the verdict. On the charge of violating federal civil rights statutes, we find the defendant, Patrick Donnelly, guilty. A tremor passed through Donnelly's shoulders. Gasps echoed from the gallery. His wife, seated in the back row, lowered her head into her hands. The foreman continued. On the charge of conspiracy to commit civil rights violations and property value manipulation, we find the defendant, Robert Kensington, guilty. Kensington closed his eyes, his face draining of color. Years of political power evaporated in a single sentence. At sentencing, Donnelly received 5 years in federal prison and the complete forfeiture of his pension. Kensington received 7 years, with additional financial penalties that would push him into personal bankruptcy once the 187 plaintiff class action suit was finalized. One of the officers, who had silently carried guilt for months, collapsed in his garage the week before sentencing and left behind a note apologizing to the community he harmed. A note the judge referenced with grim sadness. When the proceedings ended, Aisha stood in the corridor outside the courtroom. People approached her, mothers from Englewood, students from Northwestern, veterans who knew her service record. Some thanked her, some wept. Some simply looked at her with gratitude that required no words. She listened with humility. She shook their hands. She held their stories. Because today was not just a verdict. It was the opening of a new chapter the city could no longer ignore. Spring arrived in Evanston with a quietness no one expected, as if the city itself was trying to steady its breath after months of confrontation, protests, revelations, and a federal trial that had peeled back every layer of the checkpoint scheme. The barricades were gone, The cones were gone. The stop signs mounted on temporary poles had been packed into storage. For the first time in years, Sheridan Road flowed without the unspoken tension that had long defined its border between wealth and struggle. People walked more freely. Drivers from Englewood no longer braced themselves at the intersection, and city officials, stripped of old excuses, released the long-hidden stop data to the public in a gesture that felt both overdue and necessary. In the weeks following the verdict, Evanston was forced to create an independent civilian oversight board with the authority to review every stop, every complaint, and every disciplinary decision. It was not a perfect solution. Nothing could repair the years of distrust overnight, but it was a beginning, a new line drawn not with barricades, but with accountability. Aisha Washington watched the process unfold from a distance, no longer in uniform, no longer carrying the weight of a four-star command. She had retired earlier than planned, the exhaustion of the past year settling into her bones in ways she could not ignore. Her decision came quietly, without ceremony. She tendered her resignation with a steady hand and a clear mind, knowing she had given everything she had. She moved to a small home not far from Englewood, where her mother once lived, where her brother once dreamed of opening a clinic, where her own life had been shaped by both love and loss. Her days were quieter now. The phone rang less. The meetings stopped. The pressure eased. She slept longer. She walked more slowly. And she began to teach again. This time in a small community center she opened with her own savings, a space dedicated to teaching young people how to understand their rights, how to advocate for themselves, and how to survive encounters that should never happen but still did. She called the center the Washington Initiative, named not for herself, but for her brother, whose memory had guided every step she made. The room filled every evening with teenagers, bus drivers, nursing students, and young veterans who listened to her speak with a calm, steady voice that carried the weight of lived experience rather than rank. She watched them learn. She watched them gain confidence. And she felt something she had not felt since long before the arrest, a sense of peace that came not from victory, but from purpose, across the city. Detective Elena Vargas stood on the sidewalk outside the FBI's Chicago field office with her son at her side. Her badge now belonged to a different agency. She had accepted an offer to join the FBI Civil Rights Division, a role that came with fewer patrols, fewer compromises, and far more responsibility. Her son held her hand, proud in a way he could not fully express. She looked up at the building and exhaled slowly, understanding that her life was moving forward, but the memory of the checkpoint night would stay with her as a reminder of why she served. She had carried guilt. She had carried fear. Now she carried resolve, and she knew her work would honor the future she wanted to give her son, Torres. Meanwhile, lived with the complicated burden of being the whistleblower whose testimony reshaped an entire city's understanding of policing. Some officers never forgave him. Others quietly thanked him. He declined interviews, avoided cameras, and spent long nights wondering whether he had done enough to redeem himself. He volunteered at Aisha's center, sitting quietly in the back during sessions, offering insight when asked. He was rebuilding his life one honest act at a time, knowing trust would return slowly, if at all. But he showed up, and that was something no one, not even he, expected he would do when the night began. As for Kensington, his once shining political career lay in ruins. Bankruptcy filings became public record. Developers cut ties. Former allies looked the other way when he passed them in the courthouse hallway. He served as a symbol now, not of corruption, but of what happens when corruption is exposed. Evanston no longer whispered his name. It spoke it openly, as a reminder of the danger of ambition without conscience. Spring continued to settle over the city. The lakefront thawed, the wind softened, and on one unusually calm evening, Aisha drove her old Honda Accord north toward the road where everything began. The car was clean, the engine steady. She wore a simple jacket and kept the windows slightly open. When she approached Sheridan Road, she slowed. Not from fear, but from memory. The streetlights glowed softly. The intersection was clear. The asphalt carried no orange cones, no flashing lights, no signs demanding compliance from drivers who had done nothing wrong. She rolled forward. She felt the cool Chicago air on her face, and for the first time since the night she pressed the hidden button, she allowed herself a long, quiet breath, a breath without tension, without anticipation, without the weight of imminent threat. Just the breath of a woman who had survived a system designed to break her, and who had forced that system to reveal its darkest truths. She stopped her car briefly near the stretch of road where Donnelly had pulled her over. She rested her hand on the steering wheel. Her wrists still carried faint scars, reminders of the cuffs tightened without cause. She touched them gently. No bitterness came, only memory, only clarity, only the understanding that indignity, when met with resilience, could one day become the foundation of change. She looked out at the quiet street. A group of college students walked by, laughing under the lamplight. A cyclist passed. A mother crossed the road pushing a stroller. Normal life. Regular life. Life without checkpoints, without barriers, without fear. She let the moment settle. It felt fragile, but it felt real. Then she smiled. It was small at first, then steady, then full. A smile shaped not by victory, but by relief. A smile her brother would have understood. Justice was never perfect. It was slow. It was painful. It was incomplete. But tonight, the road was open. The line had been redrawn, and the city, for the first time in a long time, felt like it was learning how to breathe again. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If you believe voices like these should be heard, subscribe and give the video a like.